Why do people's brains love porn so much?
Okay, we're going right in. I like it. Good question to kick this off. Dopamine is the short answer. So a lot of people think that dopamine is about getting up like a pleasure hit or getting your hit of dopamine. That's not actually how dopamine works. Dopamine is not a pleasure acquisition chemical, it's pleasure seeking. And so what actually makes pornography so addictive is the drip of dopamine that happens in your brain leading up to, the eventual release. And porn in particular is incredibly rewarding. It's such a strong reward. It's not the same as getting high from doing a line of coke or gambling, winning at the slots. Pornography taps into our sexual desires. And so when you have this kind of dopamine drip going on that keeps us coming back again and again, and then you have an incredibly euphoric experience that is tapping into a very fundamental desire, those two hand in hand make it almost irresistible. Not quite. I overcame the addiction to it myself, but pretty close to irresistible.
And like, what are the downstream effects on the brain as far as people who consume too much porn?
So there's four in particular. We talk about this a lot on my podcast as well because I think people love the neuroscience. So I'll give you kind of the overview, and then you can tell me if you want to deep dive on any of these. Desensitization. So that's where your brain kind of builds a tolerance. And so you have to watch more, or you have to watch something more intense or something new. Sensitization, which is sounds like the opposite, but it's not. Sensitization is where your brain starts to get triggered by things that are non-sexual. So for me, when I was addicted to pornography, it was like seeing the laptop on my desk open. I don't know why. As soon as I saw that, my brain started to think about pornography. Low stress response or reduced stress response. So people who watch pornography, they actually see the shift in the brain where your ability to handle stress basically declines. And then the fourth is hypofrontality. I think this one's the worst. We have this part of our brain called the prefrontal cortex that allows us to think long term, make big decisions, delay gratification, and it actually gives us our sense of self and who we are and our value. And hypofrontality, hypo means less. And so what they've observed is that there's less circulation to this part of the brain when people are watching pornography regularly, and that hypofrontality leads to more impulsive decision making, more short term thinking, instant gratification, and really low self esteem and self worth.
I would love to dive into the last one that you just mentioned because I think that's something that can really, wreck people's lives long term if they're not careful. So talk about like how this all begins to play out.
Well, I think what happens is people's brains start to change. They experience this hypofrontality and they think, oh, I guess this is what comes with aging. They think, oh, I'm really stressed at work, or, I'm dealing with some relational stress. Most people don't think my self-esteem has declined. I must be watching too much porn. Like the research is just not very well known. So I think that makes this a very insidious trap because, people in your audience, people that are listening and watching, probably a bunch of them have watched pornography. Well, most of them have watched pornography. A bunch of them probably have pornography in their lives with some regularity, and there's kind of a trickle of impact, but they're maybe not connecting the dots. So here's some maybe deeper indicators that your brain has experienced hypofrontality. So low self-esteem, low self-worth, impulsive decision making. I also would say probably the biggest indicator is a change in your decision making. So I used to be more patient, I used to be more calculated, but now I'm a lot more. I need things right away, quick fix, instant demand. Quick fixes is another big one. So like in porn recovery space, everybody says get an internet filter. And number one, internet filters don't work because that's like running over a weed with a lawnmower. Like you're not getting to the actual cause of the problem. But the other part of it is when your brain has been programmed to get like quick dopamine hits because you're addicted to porn, and then you go for a quick fix that is supposed to solve everything right away, you literally just reinforce that part of your brain, the hypofrontality that has already been caused by pornography. So I think all of these things can be huge drivers for people's decline. And then if you go far enough down this path, low self-esteem is the bane of most relationship dysfunction. People, they make stupid decisions, they make judgments about their partners. This is where you see a lot of affairs or people starting to watch really intense content. And part of that is desensitization in the brain as well. But I would say the hypofrontality is really, really devastating. And if people carry down this path long enough, you'll look back, and this happened to me. I was addicted to porn for 15 years, and I would see pictures of myself when I was younger and think like, man, where did that guy go? Like what happened to him? Like he seems so out of the picture now because porn has warped my brain and changed my sense of self so much.
And so, what are the some of the symptoms of somebody who is watching too much porn, and maybe they're now they've developed this unhealthy relationship with instant gratification, not able to manage stress? Like, how do they know that it's porn specifically and not other habits?
I don't know that there's like one particular thing that I can say. If you have this, it's definitely pornography, um, with maybe a couple small exceptions. So one would be erectile dysfunction at an age where you shouldn't be experiencing it. So we have I mean, I've worked with a lot of clients over the years, 1,000 plus, and a lot of a handful of them, I'll put it that way, a contingent have some sort of sexual performance issues that does not match their age or their physical health. So they're under 40, they should be in the peak of their sexuality and their sex drive, and they're having erectile dysfunction, or they're having delayed ejaculation, or they're having some sort of physical response that kind of indicates like, dude, your brain has clearly been programmed. So I think that's definitely one indicator where it's like there could be other factors for erectile dysfunction like stress and relationship discord and whatever. But trust me, if you're watching pornography and you're experiencing that, 100% there's a link there. I would almost bet my money on it. The other one would be I think people's content viewership that can be very telling of how addicted you are. So if the stuff that you watch now is a lot more intense than the stuff you used to watch before, if it's a lot more niched, those are very good indicators that porn is probably having more of a role in your brain than you like to admit. Um, there was a study that suggested about 55% of heterosexual men watch homosexual porn. That's a great example of, you're watching content that is novel, content that is crossing a line that's very edgy, that doesn't even really align with your own desires, but you so need the stimulation, you so need the hit that you are willing to watch something like that. And I think that those kinds of things are very strong indicators. Like if you're watching niche content or you're watching something that it kind of disgusts you, but you still watch it anyway, all great indicators. And the last one I would say is when you watch porn even though you don't want to. So you don't want to and you still watch. Those are all really good indicators that, okay, sure, there could be a bunch of things going on in your life, but we're probably dealing with a pornography addiction.
Yeah. And outside of how it changes the front part of your brain, I think about people who watch a lot of porn, they're addicted. Maybe they're people that aren't going on dates either because they don't have the self confidence to go on dates, or they're so addicted to porn that that becomes like that's filling the void for them, right? Um, you know, what do these types of people is this porn then cause downstream effects in people's self esteem, self confidence because they just feel so poorly about who they've become?
Yes, it's sort of a self-reinforcing cycle. And the one thing I'll say is, the people that are addicted to porn typically are not the people that you would expect. They're not necessarily incels and, these like really weird, creepy guys that, can't get their act together. I mean, the most of the people we work with where we're the most successful is professional men 25 to 45, doctors, business owners, engineers, executives, athletes, all that kind of stuff. And they're a great example of this dynamic you just talked about. So if you're a high performer, your value tends to be very linked with your ability to perform. And I mean, I resonate with this. I was a high achieving academic, five figures in research grants in university, and my honors degree by the time I was 20, and skipped a grade, and all that stuff. And often there's this shame that can drive a lot of high performers. There's this shame of or this fear of like, I'm actually not good enough, and what if I get found out, and everything that comes with it. Then when you have something like a pornography issue going on behind the scenes, it reinforces that shame. It reinforces that something's wrong with me, and I can't let anybody else find out. And so we become more hidden. We work harder and harder to keep everything under wraps. And if this persists long enough, then eventually the addiction spiral continues. We become more ashamed, we hide more, we delve deeper and deeper into those bad behaviors, and it literally just keeps reinforcing itself. And to comment on what you said about like people that are single or relationships, in relationships, The one thing that I've identified, I've been helping guys quit porn for a long time now, since 2018. And the one thing I've identified is that really porn addiction at its core is an intimacy disorder. Like if people were in healthy, thriving relationships and really knew how to show up functionally, I don't think you would see this draw towards porn as much. I think people think this is just about sexual desires and, just something to take the edge off. But there's a lot of relationship wounding. There's a lot of relationship deficiencies that actually drive our desire to get pornography, which I call fast food intimacy. So I think, I think the shame fuels this, and then you have the relationship disconnect, and that disconnect can fuel the shame, and you go back to porn, and these two things can kind of oscillate back and forth.
So do you think, a big part of this is relationship dissatisfaction, and then people end up just going to porn because they're not satisfied with their relationship?
Yeah, I do. I really do. I think it's probably a little bit more nuanced than that, but I'll give you a great example. So we've worked with a lot of married guys who, when they were single, they were watching pornography and they thought, you know what, I'm not going to worry about this now. Like, I'm single, I'm going to enjoy myself, whatever. But once I get married, I'll stop. And so they find the woman of their dreams, they get serious, they get engaged, they get married, and somewhere along the way, they quit. They quit cold turkey, and they're like, wow, okay, thank God I got this at bay. And they continue in their marriage, and then their wife turns them down for sex, or they get into a fight, and they have no coping skills for dealing with rejection, for dealing with tension, for dealing with some sort of disconnect in the relationship. And their only coping mechanism that they've developed up until this point is to view pornography. And so you can keep a coping mechanism at bay for a while, but it usually just takes an encounter with some sort of discourse or some sort of challenge, or sometimes it's a major shift in life. And then lo and behold, pornography is there. And again, those changes in life are always relational. It's getting married, it's becoming a father. It's even a promotion at work is a relationship change. It's a change in your work relationships. And I do really believe that our lack of intimacy drives our addiction to pornography more than anything else.
Why can some people watch porn when they're in a relationship and not have it impact their relationship and others can't?
Well, I think it's a little bit of a misnomer to say that there's no impact if you watch pornography. I would say, I think some people watch pornography and the impact is pretty minimal. And that depends on a myriad of factors, but most of it would be relationship quality. So if you have a really high quality relationship, there's a lot of emotional intimacy, there's some history together, and people watch pornography occasionally. I would say if you follow those couples, you're not going to see anything super detrimental. However, there's always a risk. And the people that do have more devastating effects, it's not necessarily like, oh, it was okay for that couple, but it's not okay for this couple. There's something about their dynamic. Usually, what it is like anything that has an addictive tendency, is initially it starts with a little bit, but if it escalates enough, it starts to have issues. Like alcohol would be another great example. Like in theory, you can have a drink every once in a while, and alcohol is not really a big deal. But if the right set of circumstances happen and you start to use alcohol to cope because it's there, it's convenient, and you tell yourself it doesn't have that effect on me, well, if you're using it to cope, it's going to have that effect on you. So the deeper question is really, why are couples using the pornography? And the couples that often run into trouble with this, or the people that will run into trouble with this, is they're watching porn to cope. They're watching porn to compensate for a lack of sexual intimacy, or a lack of emotional intimacy, or a lack of something else. When it's that compensatory kind of impact, I think that's often when people really run into problems, because then there's a reason that 50%, 56% of divorces cite the partner's porn use as the primary cause of the divorce, because eventually somebody gets programmed to experience arousal aside from their partner. The partner becomes less necessary, as it were, for them to get their sexual release. And that's when you can kind of start the tailspin. And so I don't know that I believe there are couples who, they can just watch a little bit and it's fine. I think everybody needs to be really careful about it. But I would say if there's any antidote, or if you want to have some immunity to it, the best thing you could do would be to really focus on the emotional connection. And what most people will find is when they prioritize that emotional relationship, the desire for pornography and bringing it in is a lot less anyway.
What are some ways that you found that are kind of backed by science to deepen the emotional connection in a relationship?
So the most obvious one is we don't use the word vulnerability. I got so sick and tired of that word, Doug. I don't know if you've heard enough people talk about it yourself. It's a great concept, but the reason I got tired of it is actually because I saw people abusing it. You know, people are like being vulnerable online to get likes and follows, and I was just like, this is so stupid. We had such a great concept that now has been completely diluted. So in my community, you know, my practice is called DeepClean, and in our DeepClean community, we use the word transparency. Um, the word I used a couple minutes ago is intimacy, right? I talked about how porn addiction is kind of like an intimacy disorder. And our definition of intimacy is into me see, into me see. So how do people build emotional intimacy? They let the other person in. They choose to be transparent. And I think this is a defining quality of relationships that last, relationships that report, you know, high levels of satisfaction, and certainly relationships with healthy sex lives. There is a level of transparency that is going on at a mutual level. And this is the real key is oftentimes there's one person that's maybe a lot more willing to be transparent and the other person's pretty shut off and they feel like they have to have it all together and be the strong one. Not realizing that there's actually incredible strength in sharing more transparently and having that transparency built into the relationship. So I think that part is really important. And then I would say, coupled with it, is telling the truth. So, you know, we're talking about people that have pornography addictions and maybe other shameful sexual things that they've done, whether it's having an affair or something else. Um, Telling the truth is the only way you're going to build legitimate intimacy. And if your partner doesn't know the full truth about who you are, your relationship is a fraction of what it could be. And your need for pornography would probably be a lot less if there was actually that mutual knowledge and understanding of who you really were. So I think those are some of the big qualities that certainly we see because we work with men exclusively, but then we do walk alongside their wives as well. If they're looking for help, you know, we have people that will outsource them to. And the one thing that we do see is when couples are transparent, when they're telling the truth, especially when the guy is coming clean and telling the truth, that makes for very, very healthy emotional connection, and it's actually really healing as well in the recovery process. So those are my big things if people are really serious about emotional connection.
And speaking of like bouncing back from porn addiction, what you kind of alluded to, I think one of the hardest things for people is to control themselves, self control. What have you found to be effective in helping people who have struggled with a instant gratification addiction like porn to get so much better at self control?
Man, this is a great question. So I think we've misunderstood what self-control is, especially in a recovery context. We think that self-control is the next time I'm tempted, I'm gonna fight through it. And the next time that I have an urge or desire, I'm just gonna find a way to white knuckle my way through it. And this was my story because I would say I'm a relatively disciplined, self-controlled individual. And when it came time for me to quit pornography, I was starting to advance in my career. I kind of had this fear of being found out. And I felt like, you know, it's time to quit. I'd been watching for about 10, 11 years at that point. I went like 3 days and I was like, whoa, okay. I was not expecting that. You know, I thought this was going to be just a quick cold turkey kind of thing. And then I really started to harness my willpower and really all my self control. And I would really fight those urges. And I went maybe a few more days, a week if I was lucky. And I eventually was able to push it to, you know, every 2 to 3 weeks with some self power and some white knuckling, some self control rather. But I think what I realized, and this is ultimately what led to me experiencing freedom, is when we try to just use self control to quit an addiction, it's kind of like running over a weed with a lawnmower, right? Like in theory, everything looks clean and the weed is gone. But as long as the root system is there, that weed is going to grow back one way or the other. And I think willpower and white knuckling is kind of the same thing. It's kind of like running over that weed with a lawnmower. The reality is there's deeper reasons underneath the surface why people get caught up in these compulsive behaviors and these sexual addictions. And unless people are willing to tackle that, self control, I'll put it this way: if you have a level 100, that's your full capacity for self control. When you don't get to the root, you actually put like a limiter on how much self control you can really have. That self control becomes like a 60 or a 70 or maybe a 30 if you're really hopelessly addicted, like I was. And so getting to the roots and focusing on more of the heart level issues, that actually gives you more self-control because you understand the problem better. You know what you're up against. You have a more comprehensive view because watching pornography is kind of like the last domino to fall in a cascade of events that lead up to it. And so when you're really taking a roots-based approach to recovery, you're getting further upstream. You're identifying the bigger dominoes that maybe fall earlier. And if you can start to control those, I mean, that's real self-control, is being able to not just get your way past the behavior, but understanding the things that lead up to those moments and being able to control those things as well.
So what do you think's beneath the surface? Like, what do you think is the root cause of all this? I mean, you mentioned intimacy. Like, what is missing from someone's lives when they're addicted to porn?
I would say there's three things. It's emotional immaturity, childhood trauma, and faulty belief systems. And I think those three things wreak havoc on people's lives. If we think about emotional maturity, so you have somebody who like used the coping example earlier. The way that people cope with stress is they use pornography. That's incredibly dysfunctional, and that's a lack of emotional maturity. Guys in particular are notorious for this. We haven't been taught how to process emotions. We haven't been taught that it's okay to even have our emotions or how to channel them in a healthy way for something good and something positive. And so I think building that self-awareness is a great way to combat emotional maturity. It's actually our first pillar of recovery. All three pillars of the DeepClean system actually cover these. Childhood trauma is a big one as well. Again, people don't realize it, but I'll give you an example, Doug. If you were to comb through the data of the top 5 most researched or most searched words on pornography sites over the last decade plus, really since pornography came online, top 5 year after year is stepmom and MILF. They're always there. They're always in the top 5. Now, that's kind of weird. Like, why are we so interested in stepmom content? Like that just seems bizarre. And at a surface level, it is bizarre. It's actually weirdly incestual. But if we get a little bit underneath the surface and we explore the subject of childhood trauma, what we find out is that a lot of people that view pornography, and men in particular, men are 66, 67% of porn consumers. A lot of them are acting out childhood trauma, and trauma is not necessarily that somebody abused me and my parents were divorced, although that story is common. But sometimes, like for me, I grew up in a good home. My dad was a pastor. There was no major trauma, but my trauma was just that I had a mom who I didn't really emotionally connect with. And that lack of maternal emotional connection causes us to search other places to get that need met. And so for me, that was chasing girls and then eventually pornography. And I really believe that actually that childhood trauma for me, again, this is not the kind of trauma you necessarily think about, but this kind of childhood trauma is what actually, I don't think it led me to watch pornography. I think it's what kept me addicted for so long was I had all this unresolved trauma and I didn't really know how to deal with it. And then the beliefs thing, we can get into it. I mean, you have so many incredible guests that have been on the show talking about that, but I'm sure you can understand if you have faulty beliefs about yourself, how that's going to drive really toxic behavior as well.
Right. And I think one of the other things that has made porn that much more addictive is that the way it's consumed these days. I think that the way it's consumed has changed over the last few decades, where it's more available. I mean, there's in many ways there's no like age restrictions I'm hearing, and you can just kind of go on these random sites and on social media. I mean, there's ways I think to kind of get these dopamine rushes of kind of somewhat pornographic material as well, right? So talk a bit about how things have changed over the years that have made porn way more addictive.
Yeah, I think this actually separates porn even from other addictions. Like I know you had an addiction of your own and an incredible story. Porn is affordable, accessible, and anonymous. And the three A's is what makes it so rampant, so irresistible, and really what make it a $100 billion plus industry in our day and age. I think that social media and all that kind of stuff has done something just very subtly that now OnlyFans is also doing in our society, and that is the socialization of pornography. So you and I were sharing before we hit record that when we were growing up, the way you access pornography was kind of the seedy backroom of a video store, your dad's Playboy stash. There was a barrier to entry, right? That no longer exists. But let's take it a step further now. You have kids who are getting exposed. Some studies say as young as the age of 8. Their first exposure to pornography happens at 8. By the time they're 11, 12, 13 years old, it's just kind of understood that you watch pornography. And that socialization of pornography makes it very, very normal. So it's normal, you get exposed to it. And the problem is, because pornography is so damaging to the brain, we talked about this at the beginning of the show, because it's so damaging to the brain and it's happening to brains that are being sexually developed, the impact, people don't realize their bodies are literally being hardwired for that hit that only pornography can provide. There's actually a study that showed sexual stimulation is processed 20% faster in the body. And so, again, another way that pornography addiction differs from other addictions is you have sexual stimulation that is being processed very, very quickly, being hardwired like rapidly. And that's what can keep these young kids like really, really addicted to it long term. I think that, social media and all that kind of stuff, it plays a role. I would say that if pornography is digital cocaine, then social media is kind of like its gateway drug. It's a huge problem. But I'll tell you now, a great example of the socialization and normalization of pornography is OnlyFans. OnlyFans is kind of making all of these sexual interactions online very, very normal, right? And now you have like everyday moms, and there's all this legislation going on around like teachers that are being banned from their kids' schools from volunteering there because they found out that the mom has an OnlyFans account. And it's starting to kind of like eke its way into society, and the lines are getting blurred. And this is exactly what the industry wants. This is exactly what pornography does. And when those lines get blurry, it becomes more normal. And when it becomes more normal, it becomes more socialized. And you see our youth starting to get wrapped up in this at a much younger age.
So if we were to start to unravel how somebody can kick porn addiction as fast as possible, like what are break down the necessary steps as in depth as you can, that if somebody's listening to this or watching this, that they're able to get started right away?
Yeah, I mean, the first thing I'd probably say is let's not make it the goal to do it as fast as possible. Let's make it the goal to be as effective as possible. And obviously, we're not going to waste time, but I think effectiveness is a much better goal because, like I said, if you're trying to do this quickly, you're just going to reinforce that part of your brain that wants the quick hits. So I think that every good recovery that I've witnessed personally through my coaching, but also that I've seen, I mean, I have a huge network now of people that are in this space, and all of the recovery stories I've heard have three things in common. And so I think if somebody's listening to this, or somebody who wants to quit and who needs to get out of pornography, you want to make sure that your recovery process has these three things. Number one is building self-awareness. Building self-awareness is really understanding the emotions and the thoughts that are going on underneath the surface, like we were talking about a minute ago. The second thing is healing of the heart. It's recovering from trauma. It could be trauma, or maybe you hear that word and you're like, I don't think I have trauma. It could be just early sexual experiences. There's a lot of things that happen in earlier stages that set the tone for us for who we are today and where we are with our sexual stories. And so I think healing from childhood trauma is incredibly powerful. And if not that, at least reconciling these parts of your past that have contributed and brought you to this point you are today. And the third would be shifting your identity. The 12-step model, I'm not sure what your thoughts are on 12-step, but I know there is one adage that comes out of there that I don't agree with, and that is once an addict, always an addict. And my personal stance is that you can be recovered, and you once were an addict, but you can actually have a new identity. And I think that's what shifting your identity is. It's detaching from the person you used to be, and it's forming that new identity, that person who is restored, that person who is healed, and that person who's walking in legitimate freedom. And so I think these are the three things that every successful recovery has in common. But I'll tell you, there's some secret sauce, and the real secret sauce is connection, right? Because we were talking about earlier how ultimately people watch pornography because of some intimacy deficiency, and I would say that connection is probably the biggest thing here. And so a lot of guys in particular, we love like the self-starter. I did it all on my own story. I'm such a sucker for that, man. And like that was me. I was like, man, I'm gonna quit on my own. I'm going to like master this, and then I'm going to have this awesome story, and then I'll tell the world. And I just realized like, man, I keep trying to do this on my own and I'm failing again and again and again. I got so tired of it. And so I realized I needed to bring people in. And I had no idea how liberating that would be for me. But really and truly, like healthy connection, dude, that changed so much in my story. And I think when you take these three concepts and you wrap them in community, that's a really winning combination. And if people do hear this and they're intrigued and they want to maybe know the practicals and what it looks like and get guided through it, it's all in my book, The Last Relapse. You can just follow me and DM me on Instagram. Just DM me the word book, and I'll send you over a free copy. We try to make this stuff as accessible as possible, because I really do believe this is like the crux of a real good recovery, especially for porn addiction.
Taking this one step further, the reason I brought it up fast is because I think a lot of times people who are addicted to a process addiction like pornography, and they're getting this instant gratification, their brain is wired for quick hits, right?
Yeah.
And if they don't see the quick win right away, they're like, well, what's the point of doing this? My brain isn't liking this. How can people harness that in the early days of porn recovery?
Yeah. So, and I thank you for that detail, because I actually totally agree with that. And I would say it's you don't even just need a quick win. You need a couple. Like we need to see that there's some momentum here to really commit to a process. So we actually do this with our clients. We just redesigned our entire system, and one of the things that we vowed to do when we redesigned this, because we've been using this for 6-7 years now, is we vowed to create a quick win for our clients. And so this is actually a very simple exercise that people can do. I walk people through it on my podcast. If they want to, they can go and look for trigger diggers in my podcast, which is called The Man Within. Trigger diggers is what we call it, but I'm going to explain it here. If you take a trigger, okay, something that's triggered you to watch pornography, and let's say one of the most recent times, if you take that trigger and you ask yourself, why was that triggering? You're going to start to get some clarity on, okay, what's going on here? Like, why was that triggering for me? And let's say it's like, okay, well, I went to the gym and I saw a girl, she was attractive, and it got me kind of triggered. Maybe she reminded me of somebody that I've watched or whatever. So why was that triggering for you? Well, it's triggering for me because it reminded me of content I've watched. Why did it remind you of content I've watched? Because she looked like someone I've seen before. Why was that triggering for you? Because that person reminds me of my first girlfriend that I ever had a sexual experience with when I was 13. Okay, and why is that important to you? And you can start to see how, if we keep asking why long enough, eventually what we get to is what I call core beliefs that are driving our behavior. And so if I follow that example, well, why does that memory matter to you? Because that was my first sexual experience where I felt good about myself, or where I felt confident in myself. And why did that make you feel confident in myself? Because most days I feel like I'm not good enough. Why do you feel like you're not good enough? Because I think something's wrong with me. And again, that might sound a little bit crazy, like, well, how did you get there from, a trigger? But I'm telling you, if you ask why about 6 or 7 times, eventually you will get to a core belief. And there's a little bit more to the process here to actually flesh this out and really work through it. But I'm telling you that process I just laid out, I dare your audience to try it. And like I said, I walked them through it in the Trigger Diggers episode if they want to check it out. That's probably one of the quickest ways that you can not just get a quick win, like, hey, I went a couple days without pornography. Because I mean, I can tell you what to do that, but that's not going to be any good. This is actually how you get a quick win, getting to the roots. This is like, now we're talking about actually getting underneath the surface and tackling something at a more causal level. So that would be, I think that's probably the best win. Another really good quick win, Doug, for your audience, if they haven't told anyone before, if they're that person who's trying to do it all on their own and they're suffering in silence, really quick win is to find somebody that you can talk to about it. And what I always tell people is just answer this question. Who is the one person in your life that if you told them you were struggling with this addiction, they wouldn't judge you? Who's that one person in your life? Most people have one person. And I would say that's a really good quick win. Now, again, that requires a lot of courage, a lot of bravery. But that whole like act of coming out and letting somebody in, unbelievably powerful. And if somebody's like, well, I'm drawing a blank, I don't think I have anybody, then I would say the next best thing is to journal out your struggle. Literally write it out and document it. There's something about doing that makes it real, something that gives us perspective. And I think that can be another really quick win to just say, okay, this is what I'm dealing with. Like this is the extent of it. And at least I've come to terms with reality and I can face it head on now. So I think those are some quick ways that people can, get momentum going.
I think that, porn addiction is very like silent, right? You talked about it's an anonymous thing. It's can be very dark, very shameful for people, and it can be incredibly hard to quit. A lot of people struggle with it. Like, what do you think is the most challenging part of this process?
That's a good question. I think the hardest thing about, well, okay, I'll say two things. So I think there's the hardest thing about addiction in general is the persistence that's required, right? Because the reality is recovery for most people is two steps forward, one step back, two steps forward, three steps back. It can be a very up and down. And I think sometimes we go in and we just think it's going to be linear. It's going to be a straight line through, and we don't realize what we've signed up for. And having to just persist through and believe in yourself in the days when you had another relapse, the day when you came short some way, or it just feels like I'm doing all this stuff, but I'm still not making the progress I want. I think with addiction recovery in general, that can be really difficult. I always tell my clients, and we all need this reminder no matter what we're pursuing in life. I always tell them, if you don't quit, you win. If you don't quit, you win. And I think that adage has really helped to combat some of the difficulty of just being persistent and resilient in recovery. I think with pornography addiction in particular, the hardest thing is mending the relational dynamics. I just finished interviewing a couple for my podcast that was married for 30 plus years before this guy's porn addiction came to the surface. And it comes to the surface. She's devastated because for 30 years she thought she was married to a certain person, and she finds out she's married to somebody completely different. And I think those relational dynamics, whatever they are, they can be really difficult because you basically, when you're that guy whose wife is upset with you or a marriage is on the line, or maybe you're single, but you just know this is going to have an impact on your future relationship. We've worked with a lot of single guys as well, and a lot of them, they have this fear that if I get with somebody and they find out I'm addicted to porn, they're going to reject me, right? So I think when you have this kind of concern, the hardest thing is just is being able to just own it for what it is, to tell the truth and to continually tell the truth and confront it again and again. I think that part is really, really challenging in recovery, because it means that the outcome is no longer in your control, right? Somebody else now gets to decide the outcome because they get confronted with the truth, and then they get to make a decision with it. And for people that are that have have an addiction, they will know that control often drives a lot of their behavior and a lot of their addiction. And so this whole idea of, man, there's other relationships that are at stake here that I've caused damage to because of my addiction. And now I'm, being upfront in them. I'm telling the truth, and I don't know what the ramifications are. That can be really scary, and that can be a really difficult thing to overcome in recovery.
Right. And I think one of the things people worry about too is like, is my brain ever going to heal? Am I going to ever be able to like get back to a level of normalcy where I'm not so addicted to the quick fix? I'm not, my brain isn't just on this crazy rat race. What can people expect to happen to their brain when they give up porn?
Your brain can rewire surprisingly fast. It's one of the best discoveries in neuroscience in the last 30 years, is that our brains are plastic, and it almost doesn't matter how old you are and how bad the addiction is. Your brain can revert and reverse the effects that maybe porn has had. So I would say within the first week, if you really stop and you were watching regularly and you stop legitimately, in the first week, you will start to notice your brain change. Like, you almost start to notice like a fog lift. You're going to be a lot more present. And even in your relationships, you'll notice your heart starting to open up. Usually the hardest part of the brain changing happens somewhere in the 3 to 6 week mark. This is where you kind of get this testing of how serious were you really about this decision. Your brain starts to go back because again, like, pornography is so rewarding. And if you've been watching pornography for 5 years plus, which most people in this category have been watching a lot longer than that, your brain has kind of built this dependency on this very intense reward. So it's not going to go without a fight. And after 3 to 6 weeks, it goes, okay, I know we were staying clean to this stuff for a little bit. That's cute. But like, no. Like, I need my hit. And this is where, if you can really stomach it through these 3 to 6 weeks, that's when I think you'll really start to notice major shifts in your brain chemistry. The clearer mind, being more present in relationships, like I said, that'll be amplified. But this is also where people's memories start to come back. You know, a lot of people that watch pornography kind of they start their story and then they're like, "Oh, what was I talking about again?" You know, they kind of lose sight. So there's just a lot more focus and kind of continuity in their focus. You'll see increased productivity at work, probably better performance in the bedroom, certainly by 6 to 8 weeks, definitely a notable change in the body. Again, assuming that people are really having a roots-based approach here as well and not just white knuckling it through. And I would say usually by the time people are at about 90 days, 120 days, you know, our first stint with our clients lasts 120 days because usually by 90 their brains have changed quite a bit and we like to work with them for another 30 days to just solidify the changes and make sure that you know things are set up nicely for them to continue beyond that. So I would say again within a few months your brain can look radically different, but you have to do the stuff we're talking about, obviously getting to the roots, and you have to be consistent with it. That's the real key.
You talked about like self reflection, asking yourself certain questions when you start to get triggered, right? And I think it's just a tough thing. I think in general, whether you're addicted to porn or not, is this thing called desire, lust, right? Um, it's a tough thing, right, for people, and especially if they are wired, to be addicted to porn. Or they've wired their brain to be, searching after the quick hits as far as what someone looks like, blah blah blah. What have you found to be an effective way for people to conquer desire in their lives?
Yeah, I think the best way to conquer desire is to embrace it. You know, this is one of the best discoveries that we are just huge proponents of at DeepClean, which is that if you try to eliminate desire, you usually end up creating this wild animal within that eventually at some point is going to come out. And I know for me, as somebody who grew up in the church, that was often the message I got around sexual desires. It was like, just suppress them, just stuff them, just keep them at bay, and then one day you'll get married and you know you're supposed to just kind of unleash the fury, as it were. Like all of a sudden it's supposed to just come out and it's all good, and it just doesn't really work that way. What we've discovered is that when our clients actually embrace their desires, considering their sexual desires are a part of who they are, embracing your desires is actually a much quicker and more effective way to really gain control in this area of your life. And I'll give you a really easy example, but it's a good one. I was working with a client recently. We were doing a workshop about dissecting your fantasies because what we found is that fantasies, what people fantasize about sexually when they have a compulsive sexual behavior, their fantasies actually reveal a lot of clues about what they're really after. And so, for this particular client, I had him, you know, pull. I said, "What was, you know, one of your most recent fantasies?" And he's in a work meeting. Okay, he's with another guy that often is very mean to him, that kind of doesn't treat him well, power trips over him a little bit, and his boss. It's the three of them, and this guy's doing his usual thing. And you know, my client is kind of like, he's feeling like garbage because this guy's so mean to him. And usually, his boss stands up for him and protects him and defends him a little bit, but his boss was kind of distracted and sidetracked. And so my client just kind of felt like he was, you know, left out to dry, and he's just feeling like crap after the meeting. And so he starts fantasizing. And when we start digging into his fantasies, and there were a couple that he had mentioned, there's this underlying theme, and he actually identified it, which is that there's this theme of control. Like he is in some sort of dominating kind of position every time that he's fantasizing. There's this element of being back in control. And again, if we ignore the desire, and if we say, "Oh, don't have fantasies, fantasies are bad," and the next time he just tries to, you know, cover his eyes and somehow like pretend he's not thinking about that stuff, I think we end up with this kind of it's really the same thing. It's running over the weed with the lawnmower. It's just a running over it in a different way. So instead, what we just said is, "Hey, this is actually really valuable information because." Now we know that when you have this desire to fantasize, if typically it's about you being in control, that desire to fantasize and that tendency to fantasy is actually an indicator that something in your life feels out of control. And so the next time that you feel that desire, we can use that as like a light on a dashboard saying, "Hey, something's up here." And you can ask yourself, what would a healthier way be to experience control in this moment? And so when he reflected back on that meeting with his boss and that other colleague, he realized, you know what, I actually could have been in much better control of my emotions because I let my emotions get the better of me. I was feeling really sad. I was kind of going this downward spiral, like what's wrong with me? Like this guy can really get in my head. And if I think about what I could control, I could actually just control my thought life. I could control my emotions. I could start to just take ownership of that and say, I'm not going to let what he says affect me. I know who I am. Again, talking about that identity shift that we were talking about earlier. Um, those are the kinds of things where if we just suppress desire, we really miss out. It's actually in embracing desire that we can truly master it. And now this guy can go anywhere. He can go anywhere knowing that he has way more control over what's going on within him and certainly the decisions he's going to make. He doesn't have to be afraid of a temptation or a trigger or a fantasy because he knows that those are actually clues. Those are intel that provide him information about what he needs in that moment. And if he finds a healthier way to get that need met, he's going to be better off and he's going to certainly conquer the addiction.
What's been the most impressive transformation story you've seen?
Man, there's been some really good ones over the years. Well, this one comes up again and again with our team, and so I think if our team is salivating over this one, maybe your audience will as well. We had a guy come to us that was in a very high level position in a faith based environment. I'll put it that way. I just have to be a little bit discreet about his details. Um, and he basically came to us because if he didn't get his pornography addiction resolved, he was going to lose his job. And his higher ups had all made it very clear this needs to be resolved with. And he had a couple incidents before and told everybody it was at bay, but it wasn't. And basically, the organization said last straw. So he comes to us. Um, he's coming to us because he has to, which is not always the best set of conditions. As you know, Doug, like when somebody has to do something, they don't always do it with a cheerful heart. And so, I mean, he was sincere. Don't get me wrong. Like he wanted it, but he also, I think at first was coming just out of this fear of losing his job. A couple months in, he really starts to get it. Like he gets the DeepClean method. He sees the traction because he's gained those quick wins that we were talking about earlier, and he's really bought in. And so he really goes all in. He's willing to let us, explore childhood a little bit, and we uncover some things that need some attention. He starts to shift his identity, and by the time he finishes his first 4 months with us, he is. I mean, he's on cloud nine. He's doing really well, but he's been here before. Like he's had the 3-4 months of freedom, and somewhere along the way, he fell through. So we're cheering him off. We do have some continuation elements, but he felt like, I think I'm doing good, and I'm gonna kind of ride it out. So we don't hear from him for a little bit, and at 6 months, he circles back in and he says, "Hey guys, just hit 6 months. Sorry, no, it would have been I just hit I think 9 months or 10 months, something like that. Thank you again for the work and all that kind of stuff." We're like, okay, cool. That's great. Like, glad to see he's still doing really well. He hits 18 months clean and he messages us. And it's this big, big, long email. And I'll give you the Coles notes. But he basically said, I've never gone this long before, for starters. Number two, my work has never been better. Like, I'm thriving, I'm present, my performance, my productivity, everything's at an all-time high. The guy has 5 kids, and so he's like, I'm present with my kids. They're all thriving because I'm doing way better as a father. And just at the end, he just kind of like snuck this in at the end. He says, "Oh, and I've run 2,200 miles since I finished DeepClean." And we're like, "Oh, what's that all about? Story up." And it turns out he had this lifelong dream to run an ultra marathon. And pornography had taken such a toll on his body and his drive and ambition that it just got kind of further and further shelved. And he was like, yeah, one day. But then, one day turns into maybe somebody else will do it and whatever. So when he quit pornography, it was such a confidence boost and he had such a better view of his own body and such a better appreciation of himself that he just decided, you know what, I'm going to do it. I'm going to start training for ultra marathons. And so when he wrote us, he had finished his first ultra marathon, and with all the training and everything combined that led up to it, he had ran over 2,200 miles. So I love that story because it just goes to show you when you have a roots based approach, you don't just quit the behavior and carry on with your life. You literally transform at a fundamental level, and every single area of your life is affected. Even your physical health can be impacted by quitting pornography.
Sathia, I think that's a great place for us to end our combo. Thank you so much for coming on. I love this episode. I think my audience can get a lot of value out of it. You've shared a little bit about where people can connect with you. If they want to learn more, where's the best place to do that?
Yeah, I'm Sathiya Me Sam on Instagram. If people want to hit me up there, like I said, you can DM me book and I'll send over a copy. That'd be my treat. And then The Man Within is our podcast, and that's another great place for people to get resources. Either of those would be amazing.
Awesome, man. Well, thanks again for coming on the podcast.
Thanks for having me, Doug.